Welcome to Where Are They Now? We reach into the archives of Lenape, Shawnee, Cherokee, and Seneca high schools and invite selected alumni to share memories and fill us in on their career paths after commencement. Since Lenape's first graduating class in 1961, Shawnee's in 1972, Cherokee's in 1978, and Seneca's in 2005, over 65,000 individuals have received diplomas from these four schools. Here now is your host, DJ Dini.
Welcome to another episode of Where Are They Now? Today, we'll be reconnecting with an alum from Lenape's class of 1965, Dr. Vinton Thompson. Vinton is the president of the Metropolitan College of New York, and he lives in New York City. Welcome to the show, Vinton.
How are you?
I'm doing very well, and obviously you are introduced as Dr. Vinton Thompson, but I'm just going to call you Vinton if that's okay with you.
That's great with me.
Okay, so you graduated Lenape High School in 1965. That was, we figured out, was the second graduating class that went all 4 years at Lenape High School. So talk a little bit about early life at Lenape and what it was like at, obviously still a pretty new school at that point in time, and some of the experiences that went along with that.
Yeah, Lenape was new. Up until that time, Vincenttown, where I was from, Southampton Township, had gone to Pemberton High School. So this was a major rearrangement. Both of my parents had gone to Pemberton High School, and in fact had met there. So it was a change for us. One of the things I remember most strongly is that I think for 2 of those 4 years we were on split sessions. This was the sort of the early crest of the baby boom. South Jersey was rapidly developing, and there were lots and lots of us coming through, and they could barely build room in the schools to hold us.
Now, something else you mentioned along with that, mall proms. What do you mean by mall proms?
Well, we had our junior and senior prom respectively, and I can't remember which one, at Cherry Hill Mall and Morristown Mall. Wow. In the new enclosed spaces. Enclosed malls were a big cutting edge thing, and our area was right on the crest of that wave too.
I think they should try that again, go back to that. I'm sure the kids would it would have a little bit different appeal to them than they have now. But as you mentioned, I guess those malls were very new at the time, as was the Lenape experience.
That's true. The malls were new. Having indoor malls was a big thing. They had palm trees. We'd never seen palm trees.
Wow. So some of the activities that you had in high school, you competed in track and cross country?
That's true.
Talk a little bit about that. What, was that something you did all year long?
Yeah, well, we did cross country in the fall and track in the spring. One of my coaches was Mr. McCabe, Ed McCabe, who just passed away in recent times, and he was also my English teacher. One of the things I remember about that was at that time, Lenape hired its first African-American teacher. I believe his name was Mr. Clark. He was also a track coach.
Now, one of the other activities you participated in was the debate club?
I did participate in the debate club.
Was that something that you saw a future in, or was it just something you did to kind of keep your interest going? Or
I was, I guess, good at talking. I was a fast talker. I liked to argue about things. I was disputatious, so I think it was natural.
Now, in the theater activities, what did you do there? Obviously, you said you didn't act. So
didn't
what did
act. We did. I remember doing the lighting for The Importance of Being Earnest.
So you did more stage type of activities?
Stage type stuff. Gotcha.
Now, some of the teachers you recalled, you already mentioned a couple. How about Mrs. Abbott?
I do remember Mrs. Abbott. I also remember her son, who was there in the same period. She was a great math teacher. Mr. Johnson, who I think later went on to be principal of one of the Lenape District schools, was a great math teacher too.
How about Mrs. Wilson?
I remember Mrs. Wilson well. She was, I believe at the time, head of the science department, and she was really quite good. And of course, that's what I went on to do, so that was important to me.
When you were in high school, did you have any aspirations of what you wanted to do, or was it kind of just like you decided toward the end, or once you got to college? How did that go?
Well, I grew up in a small rural town. I guess Vincenttown still is, and I think I wanted to get to a city. And in terms of what I wanted to do, when I went to college, I was divided between biology. I'd always had an interest in biology and natural history, partly from growing up in a rural place like Vinton Town, and I had an interest in history itself.
So you ended up going to Harvard, correct?
I did go to Harvard.
What was the Harvard experience like?
The Harvard experience was a lot of culture shock, coming from a pretty rural, small town. I have to say that I think Lenape prepared me well academically. I really did quite well there. I wasn't sure, coming from a little town, whether I was up to it or not, but I really loved my first year there. I did very, very well, I think in part because the Lenape preparation was good. And I have to say, in retrospect, a lot of my teachers at Lenape were better than a lot of my teachers at Harvard.
You got in there, did you have other options, or was that like a choice that you had made from the beginning?
No, I remember I was pretty naive. I went to see the guidance counselors and I asked them where they thought I could go. And I'll never forget, they said they thought I could go anywhere. They turned out to be pretty much right. I was accepted also at Stanford and at Cornell. I also applied to Rice, but I missed an SAT date, and Rice, which was free at the time, was unforgiving on that. So I never actually got an up or down at Rice, and by that time I'd gotten into Harvard and Stanford and Cornell, and sort of told Rice I was no longer interested.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a couple other options to fall back on. So you go through Harvard. Did you kind of direct your future when you were there? You kind of narrowed down what you wanted to do?
Yeah, freshman year I had two great classes. I had a history class in East Asian history with John King Fairbank, a very famous Asian China scholar. It was a great class, but I decided that memorizing all those dates and events wasn't where I was at. I also had a freshman seminar with the president of Radcliffe, which at that time was the women's division of Harvard, although the classes were united. We all went to school together, and she actually had us doing science in a laboratory with bacteria, and I really liked doing that. And that was, I think, what set me down the path of doing biology for the rest of my time there as my primary interest.
You graduate, you already decided you wanted to go to medical school?
Oh no! When I graduated, I never had any interest in medical school. I think in part because every time I go to get in a hospital, I get the creeps. So I was interested in academic biology. I was in particular by that time interested in evolution. I had a great professor, E.O. Wilson, became very famous later on. I took a course in evolution from him in my sophomore year. And that really, really hooked me. And from that point on, I was pursuing evolution, and I was lucky enough to hook up. I went to him to say I'd like to do a senior thesis under him, and he said, well, I've got 7 graduate students. I've got too many people. Go see this young fella who's over at the Museum of Comparative Zoology, which was a part of Harvard. And so I went to see this new young professor who'd come in, and that turned out to be Stephen Jay Gould, who later became a very famous scientist and popularizer of science, and I ended up doing my senior thesis with him.
So you finished in 1969 at Harvard, and then you go to the University of Chicago where you get your PhD. Did you go right there, or did you take any time off in between?
I went right there. Those were tumultuous times. It was right in the middle of the anti-war movement. There was uncertainty about the draft, and I ended up going directly to the University of Chicago, where I had full fellowship for 5 years.
Okay, so once you're there, you kind of narrow down your craft and decide exactly what you want to do. Were you ready to go into the work world at that point? And did you know what you wanted to do when you got out of the University of Chicago with your PhD?
At that point, we'd been through 10 years of the Vietnam War, which ended at about the same time I graduated, and I had never been out of school. I'd been in school for a little over nine years, and without a break. I took some time off. I worked for OSHA, the federal program for occupational health. I ran a little bookstore for a while, and then after a gap of about 5 years, went back to a more conventional academic career.
So then that's pretty much right around the time where you went to Roosevelt University?
That's correct. In 1980, I think in January of 1980, I went to Roosevelt University. I taught there as an adjunct professor while I was a graduate student, and I had an opportunity to go into a tenure track position there in biology. It was the only job I applied for. This was one of those lucky times in life when I was looking for a job. I wasn't eager to leave Chicago, and I simply fell into a job at Roosevelt, which was an ideal job for me.
Well, you spent a long time there, at 24 years?
About 24 years in the end.
And so what went to that decision of moving on from there?
Well, at Roosevelt, I was an assistant professor. I got tenure and promoted to associate professor. Roosevelt was going through some hard times, so I left for a couple of years. I went to work for the city college system in Chicago, which is the community college system there. I worked there in institutional research, and then Roosevelt got a new president, and he offered me an opportunity to come back and lead the biology program. So I went back to Roosevelt at that point after a little break, and worked my way sort of up through administration. I eventually became head of a science and math division, and then I became an associate provost. And a provost is sort of like the number two guy at most institutions where they have the position. And then at one interesting week, the president announced that he was retiring. The provost announced that he was leaving to take a presidency at another institution. And I was elevated on a temporary and then permanent basis to the provost position. I later, in about 2003, we got a new president. I decided if I was ever going to come back to the East Coast, now was the time. And I came back to New Jersey, in North Jersey, as provost of Kean University.
And so you're provost and VP of Affairs at King University for about 4 years. Was it a similar position to what you were already doing?
Yeah, it was a lateral move, but to a larger institution. Roosevelt, which is a private nonprofit institution in Chicago at the time I was there, had about 7,500 students. Kean had roughly twice as many. And so it was a larger institution with a more diverse set of programs. And I also was interested, by that time, having spent most of my adult life in Chicago, at exploring the New York metropolitan area.
Now, you move out of there 2008 to your most recent position.
In 2008, I had the opportunity to assume the presidency of Metropolitan College of New York, which is where I am now, and I've been there since. It gave me an opportunity to come back to an urban institution. I'd really enjoyed working at an urban institution in Chicago, and my primary love in higher ed has been adult students, and that is the core of what Metropolitan College has always done. It was also a very important constituency at Roosevelt University and a significant one at Kean. And it gave me an opportunity to come back and work with adult working students who are really sort of my heart and joy in terms of higher ed.
So obviously you have a ton of responsibilities. What are some of your day-to-day things that you have to take part in as president?
We're a relatively small institution. We have about 1,200 students, and so I know everybody. We have about 110 full-time employees. I know virtually all of them personally. And my job is number one, to keep things going smoothly. Number two, to bring in the resources that we need to go forward. Right now, our big initiatives are moving into two brand new campuses. We will move our Manhattan campus, which is our main campus with over 1,000 students, to a new facility that's just 4 buildings south of the World Trade Center. And we're moving all 1,000 students or so, and most of our employees there. This is a big deal for us. We've just done a gut renovation of a large portion of a building there, and both acquiring that facility and finding the financing to make it work, and overseeing the logistics to do the renovation and the move has been a big part of what I've done over the last couple of years. We also are building a new facility in the South Bronx, which is the northernmost borough in the city of New York, and we will move into that facility this summer. So I've spent a lot of time promoting these new facilities, promoting the college in among more general publics, and then seeing that we do the best we can to provide a good education at a reasonable price and serve working students for the most part who have not been as well served as a lot of students by the traditional system of higher education.
Obviously, it's a high-stress position. I mean, anytime there's you're the head of anything, you know, it kind of all responsibility falls on you ultimately. It sounds like you've undertaken quite a few projects since you've been there.
Yeah, and overall we've had success. During the period I'm here, our enrollment has grown. Like most private small nonprofit colleges, most of our revenue comes from tuition, so it's important to keep students coming in the door, and you keep students coming in the door by providing excellent service and education.
You've had different jobs over the last 30 years, but they've all kind of been in the same area. You had a few that kind of were lateral overlaps. How have you seen them change since you started, those positions, and how they're done and how technology has been involved with them? Like, how have you seen it kind of progress since you started?
Yeah, I think in higher ed, one of the major things that's happened is that there is more external oversight, more external concern about what's going on in institutions of higher ed than there was when I started back in the 1980s. And we are subject both to more scrutiny by the Department of Education in Washington, by Congress, and there's a general concern in society about whether higher ed is worth the investment on the part of individual students and families. And I think there are many more concerns about that than there were back in the 80s and 90s. That reflects in part the fact that on a relative basis, higher education has become more expensive over time.
Whenever there's an election or there's things going on in the world, people talk about higher education as something that they want to either change or keep the same, or maybe make more accessible to other people. Is that something that you see happen a lot, or is it something that really affects you on a day-to-day basis?
It affects us. Our college, Metropolitan College in New York, was a pioneer in engaging populations that, as I mentioned before, have not been particularly well served by higher ed over time. And we've also done a good job of trying to integrate what students are doing in classes with what they're doing in their jobs in real life. We've really been a pioneer in that effort. Another change in American higher ed has been the desire to move toward demonstrating real competencies as people go forward, as opposed to just abstract learning. And that's an area in which we have done particularly pioneering work over the years, and also to demonstrate that there's some connection, at least, between what students are learning in college and the jobs they're doing, or the prospective jobs they'll be doing in the case of younger students who aren't in the workforce yet. Coming
from Chicago and New York, two different cities, but there's much difference in the type of thing that you see on a day-to-day basis, just living your life, you know, going to work and being a part of the culture and what's going on. Was there much difference in that change? I know you said you wanted to move a little bit closer to, you know, this area, and it gave you a chance to come back here closer to home, you know, originally. What changes went along with that? What did you see in your everyday life?
Well, I was in Chicago 35 years. Chicago is a wonderful city. I used to tell, honestly, job applicants when I would do interviews that I thought Chicago had the best combination in the country of urban amenities and cost of living. I loved living there, and it was a great place to raise two children. I also love New York. New York is about 3 times as big as Chicago. Brooklyn alone has more people than Chicago, just as a little anecdote. And New York is also quite welcoming of outsiders. I think New York is a great place to come when you haven't grown up there and haven't been there, and be successful. New York is almost 40% of the people who live in New York right now are direct immigrants. They were born in another country. I think that's an extraordinary figure, and it's almost as high as the peak of immigration in 1910. And I'd say one of the differences between Chicago and New York is a much more heavily immigrant city, and I think that's a wonderful thing too. So I love working in the city. I love riding the subway. That's how I get around. I sometimes don't get in my car for 2 or 3 weeks at a time and use it at all. And I don't think there's any better and more interesting place to work in the field that I work in than New York City and Manhattan in particular.
Now, going to your personal life, kind of staying along with that, you met your wife, I believe, after you finished getting your PhD?
No, I met my wife senior year at Harvard.
Okay.
We took an ecology class together. She was an English major, and she took it just for fun, and I took it as part of my biology major. It was a small class by Harvard standards. It was only about 25 or 30 students, and we took field trips, and so we all got to know each other pretty well. My wife and I did not date in college. That was probably a good thing. And we ran into each other accidentally on the street in Chicago after I had moved there to go to graduate school, and she'd gone home. She'd grown up in Chicago and didn't know quite what she wanted to do after she finished college, and moved back to Chicago. And we literally just ran into each other by accident on the street.
And from there, you just kind of, I guess, decided that it was going to work, and you got married in 1975?
We did, yep.
Okay, and you mentioned your two sons, Owen and Isaiah, in 80 and 84?
That's correct.
And I guess obviously they grew up most of the time in Chicago, and then they were already, I guess, finishing school when you came to New York?
Yeah, they grew up in Chicago. Isaiah had already finished high school by the time I came east. Owen was, and I should mention, by the way, we sent them both through the Chicago public schools. I myself am a proud product of the public school system, and my kids are too. Our younger son, Owen, had come east to go to college by the time I moved east. He actually said, "Hey, Dad, you're following me."
Where did they go to school?
My older son, Isaiah, went to the University of Wisconsin, where he majored in English and history, creative writing as was his primary major. He's now a journalist, made some use of that in the end. And my younger son, Owen, went to Bard, which is a small college on the Hudson River upstate in New York.
Interests for you, obviously, married to Ruth. What do you guys like to do in your free time?
Well, in my position, I don't have a lot of free time. I work essentially 6 days a week with the college. The college goes 6 days a week. Because we serve adults, we do a lot of evening and Saturday programming. So that keeps me pretty busy. However, I still do keep up my scientific interest. I work with a group of bugs called spittlebugs. I have a research associate appointment at the American Museum of Natural History, the wonderful Natural History Museum in New York City, up on Central Park West. And they give me 24/7 access to the place. I keep my working collection there. And about every other Sunday afternoon, I do some scientific research working at the museum. My wife and I also use most of our extended vacations as field trips to collect insects as part of that research.
So you're actually a leading expert in the United States on spittlebugs.
On spittlebugs. That's probably true.
Yeah, I have to plead ignorance here. I've never heard of a spittlebug until now. What is a spittlebug?
Spittlebugs are, there are about 2,500 species. They are like the mosquitoes of plants. That is, they make their living sucking plant juices. That in itself doesn't do the plant a lot of harm, but in some cases they actually transmit viruses or diseases in the course of doing that. And they're pretty serious pests in Latin America of sugarcane and of pasture grasses.
Do they exist much in this Northeast area?
They do. I had a little bug collection when I was a kid in Vinton Town. I had no special interest in spittlebugs. I picked that up when I was in graduate school. But they certainly are in the Northeast, and I've gone back and done some collecting in South Jersey.
Okay, I wouldn't even know that they're here. I have to pay a little bit more attention.
You can see them if you go out. Typically, well, people will notice them in the spring. You'll see what looks like spit on plants, and that comes from the bugs sucking the juices and putting little bubbles in it as they pass it through their body. And it looks for all the world like somebody spit, but if you go into the spit, and it's quite harmless. You'll find a little green bug inside there.
You mentioned going through college and then the period of time where the Vietnam War was going on. Obviously, a key part in your life and also a key part in the history of the country. But something else happened during your important time in high school was Kennedy assassination that you had mentioned.
Yes.
Kind of was very memorable to you. So you lived through two very memorable parts of our history in the country. What was that like, that experience in high school when that happened?
Well, I will never forget the Kennedy assassination. The administration simply turned on the intercom system and broadcast the incoming news. And I remember walking in the hallway, seeing my friend Al Brick, who was a classmate, remarking on what a just a horrible and unexpected thing that was. I was reminded of it when my younger son Owen was in high school, and same thing happened during 9/11. They
Right.
just turned on the intercom system and played it, and I think that there were parallel kinds of experiences.
Yeah, there's those things, I think, that those events that everybody kind of remembers where they were and exactly what was going on. No matter how long ago it ends up being, it's still vivid memories.
Yeah, and then of course the Vietnam War was very important to us. I graduated from high school right about when the Vietnam War was ramping up in 1965, and I finished my PhD in December of 1974, right before the Vietnam War ended in 1975. So that 10-year period from when I graduated from Lenape till when I got my PhD essentially coincided with the Vietnam War. And so I spent a lot of time observing and in some circumstances participating in activities related to those developments.
Is there anything during those high school years that you would maybe do over or do again that you can think back to?
Well, I should say one other thing that happened to me during high school was my father passed away when I was a sophomore. He died of brain cancer after a year or two of illness, and so that was a hard period in my life. I think in some ways having Lenape and some of the great teachers there was a kind of distraction that was very useful to me. I've never felt that I wanted to relive that part of my life because it was so very difficult. I do look back fondly on competing in cross country, in particular, on some of the wonderful classes with Ed McCabe in English, and some of my science teaching was great too. So I think that in terms of reliving, I see occasionally people I went to Lenape with, and also people I went to Vincenttown Elementary School with. They're really important to me. I've lived in large cities ever since I left Lenape and Vincenttown at the age of 18, but I take a little bit of South Jersey, that rural background, and Lenape with me, and it's, I think, part of the thing that's helped keep me grounded as I go forward and have worked in very different contexts in my adult life.
Well, I thank you very much for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule and sharing these many experiences with us.
Okay, I thank you.
We've been speaking with Lenape alum Dr. Vinton Thompson, the president of the Metropolitan College of New York. Thank you for joining us today, and please join us next time for more alumni interviews on Where Are They Now?